Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and welcome to our descent tutorial for the Flight Sim Studios Boeing 727. We are about 10 minutes from our expected top of descent and we can start to work our way into our descent planning already. So first things first is to determine where is our top of descent actually going to be, and to do that we need our destination airport charts. So let's go down here into the charts. We can close the Edinburgh charts, and instead we are going to take our destination charts for Brussels. Most importantly, over here we need to know our approach and our expected weather conditions. So use your favorite weather source in order to determine what those are going to be. At the moment the weather is wind 190 at 5, cavalcade 21 degrees, QNH 1015. So we are going to land on runway 25 right today in Brussels. Our arrival is going to be via Coxie, so we can select the Coxie charts down here. And looking at the chart, you can see that from Coxie we are going to fly on towards Kirky, and then from there we are going to fly the standard approach. So let's take a look at this. Brussels, ILS 25 right. Let's check out the charts we have available. And you can see that from Kirky, indeed, there is a standard approach available into our destination. So now the question is, how much distance will we actually need for our descent? And we can plan this quite easily. So basically, we need 3 nautical miles per 1,000 feet of altitude above our destination aerodrome. Now Brussels is located more or less at sea level, as you can see on the top of the chart over here, and we are flying in flight level 330, so we need roughly 99 miles in order to lose that altitude. On top of that you can add another 10 miles in order to slow the aircraft down, so we're looking at roughly 110 nautical miles in order to descend our aircraft. Now from here, we can go ahead and calculate backwards. Likewise, if there is any altitude restriction or anything along your chart that may serve useful in doing your calculations, by all means go ahead and make use of that. Example, we want to make our life as easy as possible. That means, as we need an interception altitude of 2,000 feet for the ILS, and we gotta maintain 2,000, or rather we have a minimum altitude from 2000 until after Bruno VOR. Let's go ahead. You can see that 3000 feet restriction over Bruno, so let's use that. In other words, we plan to reach 3000 at Bruno. So now we have our cruising level 33,000 minus those 3000, which now makes 30,000. 30 times 3, 90 miles, plus 10 to lose the altitude. In other words, 100 miles prior to Bruno, we want to start our descent. So now we need to calculate backwards. So Kirky is 34 miles prior Bruno. In other words, 100 minus 34, 66 miles. So 66 miles prior Kirky, we need to start our descent. Now going on the star chart, you can see that the distance between Coxie and Kirky is 51.8 miles, so roughly 52. So we have 66 minus 52, and that is going to be 14 miles. In other words, 14 miles inbound to Coxie, we are going to start our descent towards our destination. So I have already tuned Coxie on the DME number 2, and that's 114.5. You can see 114.5 is active over here. So 14 miles inbound Coxie, we start the descent. 85 miles is what we have, or 84 now. So we have 70 miles in order to start preparing the aircraft for our descent now. So let's go ahead and start our setup. So what are we going to need? Well, first of all, we got to decide which VORs we're going to use for our navigation. Obviously, Coxie is the obvious one. Now there is a small comment down here, Tarkan not co-located to the VOR. doesn't matter too much, we are going to use the VOR. All this means is that the DME, which is part of the Takan installation, is probably not quite accurate. Or, well, you can see they are basically at the same position, so not a lot to worry about actually. Okay, so in any case, we're going to use Coxie as our first navigation means, 114.5, in order to fly towards Kirky. For this reason, we can select 114.5 in our nav1 radio. So 114.5 active in here, and then we gotta join the radial 100 outbound. So let's go ahead and set our course selector to the radial 100. Pretty much like this. Okay, we're going to fly this all the way to Kirky. Then from Kirky, we are going to join the ILS approach for runway 25 right. So then we have 070 inbound to Bruno. So Bruno is going to be the next VOR that we need for the approach. Therefore, I will set 110.6, which is the frequency of Bruno, into the standby nav1 radio. So 1106 is set into here. Of course, we also need the ILS, so I am going to pre-select that frequency, 108.9, down here. You can see we have that already on our nav1. And for the missed approach, we can look ahead at that already as well. Climb on track 244 at 700, turn right, heading 015, climb 3000, then as directed. In other words, there is no need for any navigation setup for the missed approach. The approach itself starts in 2000 feet. We do have an outer marker over here, so we can go ahead, and if we had one... Okay, looks like we actually don't have a marker installation in this airplane. Otherwise, I would have set activated now so that we don't... so that we can listen to the marker as well. Of course, we still have the visual depiction of the markers over here. So the outer marker is the blue one right down here at the bottom, and that is when that is going to illuminate, we got to be in 1,410 feet on the glide slope. Apart from that, our minimum is going to be 302, as we can see up here, and that equals a radio minimum of 200, as you can see in the brackets. So we're going to tune 302 on the conventional indicator over here, 302, and then 200 on the radio altimeter. Note that the MDA light up here is going to illuminate once we pass the 200 feet radio. However, the approach itself is based off the barometric altimeter, so this one is literally just a reminder, but this is not an actual indication that we have reached our minimums. Again, something to keep in mind there for you guys. So next up, we make sure that our landing field elevation is set in the cabin pressure computer. So the runway elevation is 102 feet. And we can go to the back to our flight engineers panel and ensure that 102 is set down here. So we can go for 100 down here on that panel. Okay, so that much for our preparation is complete already. What I would recommend you to do so that you can control your altitude management a little bit better is that you write yourself a table. If you want to be in Bruno in 3000, then what altitude do you want to have over Kirky? What altitude do you want to have over Coxie? And maybe also write yourself a little table on a little post-it of intervals, like 10 miles outbound Coxie, I want to be at that altitude. 20 miles outbound, I want to be at that altitude. You can base all of that on the 3-to-1 rule. So 3 nautical miles per 1,000 feet. And like that, you can calculate all of that backwards and create a table of crossing altitudes for you. That way, you will be able to monitor your descent progress really easily. So let's go ahead and go over a little example of how such a table would be created. So we'll calculate it backwards. 3000 over at Bruno. So that means 10 miles in or 9 miles inbound Bruno, we want to be in 6,000. Or 6,300, 10 miles inbound Bruno. Like that, you can draw yourself a little table and do those calculations. So let's go ahead and just write it down over here. So unfortunately we don't have any free text clipboard here, so I gotta use paint.net or basically whatever works really. So personally I am using my iPad over here to write that down, but anything works. Okay, so 3,000 at Bruno. So Bruno minus 10 miles. Where do we want to be when we reach that? So a little calculation. I'm right now writing down BUN minus 10, and I want to be there at an altitude of 6,300. Then Bruno minus 20, want to be there at an altitude of 9,400. Next up, we can take Bruno minus 30, and over there we got to take the deceleration at level 100 in account. So from 300 knots towards 250 knots, it's going to be a deceleration of roughly 5 nautical miles. So 30 miles prior Bruno, we got to take those 5 miles into consideration. That means the remaining distance now is going to be about 5 miles. In 5 miles we cover 1,600 feet vertically, so that means we want to be in 1,200 feet, 30 miles prior Bruno. Now Kirky is located another 4.2 miles. 4.2 miles is roughly 4 nautical... Yeah, 4 nautical miles, surprise. Sorry for that. And that equals around about 1,300 feet. So at Kirky we want to have 12,500 feet. And like that you can draw yourself up a table. Okay, so we're now approaching 12 miles prior to Coxie, and that means we can start our descent. So first things first, dial down the cruising altitude. Next thing, we are going to select your altitude selector to arm, and now we can dial down our thumb wheel down here. Make sure to decrease thrust so that we maintain Mach 0.8 until reaching 300 knots. And now you might be asking yourself, okay, so how exactly am I going to navigate this? Or which vertical speed do I need? Small trick, go to the ground speed selector over here. Over here you can see we're doing 500 knots over ground times 5, and that's going to be the vertical speed you need. So we need about 2,500 feet a minute here. So let's use the thumb wheel so that we reach 2,500. Okay, excellent. So we are approaching Coxie, which is the last waypoint in our INS flight plan. So let's go ahead and switch over from INS navigation to heading select. We're in heading select now, heading more or less towards the station, and as soon as we overfly the station, we're going to turn onto the radial outbound that we have over here, so from Coxie towards Kirky. So, approaching the station now, overflying it now. Let's go ahead and turn onto that radial. And from here on we are going to resume conventional navigation. So that's about as easy as it gets. Now for the landing we got to prepare a couple more things. So we're going to let the airplane establish on the radial outbound from Coxie over here. And once that is done, we can go ahead and start to prepare our approach. So we need to determine our approach speeds and the go-around EPR. Again, for that we are going to go into the tables. But first things first. So our radial is coming active right now, And with that coming, let's switch our autopilot back in a nav lock mode. So like that, the airplane is now going to intercept the radial outbound from Coxie VOR. And we fly this for 51.8 miles until we reach Kirky. So now that we have a bit of time, let's find out our current gross weight. So we have a zero fuel of 120,000 pounds roughly, plus our fuel on board, which is about 2,500 per tank, so that's 7,500 pounds. We are going to burn a little bit until landing, but let's not dwell over that. So 7,500 plus 120,000 gives us a current gross weight of 127,500 pounds. So let's go into our table and determine the data we need. So again, from the Flight Sim Studios manual, down here we've got our approach speed tables. Our gross weight we have available for 125,000 pounds or for 130,000 pounds. I suggest that you take it conservative and take the next higher one. So we are going to go for 130,000 pounds. At flaps 30, that means our approach speed is going to be 122 knots. So we can buck in 122 on the lower airspeed buck. Like this. Next up, we go right back into the manual, and seeing that we have any gross weight up to 150,000, our minimum maneuvering speed for flaps up is going to be 200 knots, and for flaps 5 it's going to be 160 knots. So let's go ahead and buck that in. That means we are going to keep the 200 knots buck, and I'm going to set the next one to 160 as a reminder for the flap positions that we are commonly going to use on the approach. So with that good stuff now set up, let's go ahead and set the last one, and that is going to be our go-around EPR. So once again we got to enter the manuals, and we got to go up until we find our normal go-around thrust, which we have over here. So our airport is located at sea level, and our temperature at the destination is currently 21 degrees. So we're going to enter the table with 20 degrees at sea level. So we have a go-around EPR of 1.97 and 1.99 respectively. So we can go ahead and tune that in here. 1.97, 1.99, and we can set engine number 3 to 1.97 as well. And with that, we're completely set up for the approach. And that's about as easy as it gets. So let's go ahead and select our altitude down to 3,000, which we plan for over at Bruno VOR. And let's take a couple moments to talk about the monitoring of the descent process. You can see we're doing 300 knots nicely, as we should. So normal descent speed, cruise Mach number until you intercept 300 knots, and then 300 knots till 10,000, thereafter 250, and then reduce as necessary. Now, we said earlier that we wanted to reach Kirky at an altitude of 12,500 feet. So Kirky is located at... Now we need that chart again. Kirky is located at 51.8 miles, and we're currently at 37. That means we need to fly roughly 15 nautical miles towards Kirky. 15 divided by 3 is going to be 5. That means we're going to lose 5,000 feet until we reach Kirky. Therefore, 18,500 minus 5,000, 12.5. In other words, we are flying exactly on our predetermined descent schedule over here. Last but not least, we can use our INS with the mode selector in the ground speed position in order to update our ground speed, which is now about 450 knots. So that means we got to descend at slightly less than 2,500. So 435 times 5 gives us the vertical speed of somewhere about 2,100, 2,200 feet a minute. So 2,500 is going to suit us well. Approaching our next turning point then, from Kirky we are going to turn left towards Bono 10.6, ensure that the frequency is selected down here, which it is, and now you can cheat a little bit. what you can do is you go onto heading select on the current heading, like this, and now we can already tune in the next frequency, which is going to be Bruno, and the inbound course 070 into the course line, and like that we can simply intercept the radial as we pass it. Now you can see Coxie is still tuned in number 2, so we see our mileage here, and basically we can use our inbound of 070 towards Bruno that we've set up over here in order to intercept that profile. So I'd say we're approaching it now. Let's switch the autopilot back into navlog mode, and now we are nicely turning inbound on the radial towards Bruno. That little trick going to heading select just prior to the turning point sometimes really helps to make your life easy. So 34 miles prior to Bruno, we're passing 13,300, so we're 700 feet high on profile, but that's easy to correct with the speed brake later on, so that is nothing for us to worry about. So, simulator frozen here for a second, and here we go again. Okay, so now, remember, 30 miles prior to Bruno, we wanted to be in 11,200, so we can nicely use this one over here now to cross-check our altitude, and we can already go ahead and select our number 2 radio to the ILS frequency, and like that we are receiving the mileage already. Unfortunately in the sim, the needle points to the station. That shouldn't happen. For that reason I'm just gonna switch it away. In the real world it would not point to a localizer. That's a simulator bug. Okay, we're approaching the clouds, but the temperature is already more than 10 degrees, so we don't need to worry about any icing conditions over here. Let's go ahead and, since we are cleared to an altitude, set our QNH, which in Brussels at the moment is 1015. So 1015, 1015, and 1015. Okay, passing 10,000 feet, switching over to pitch the airplane up a little bit to start reducing our airspeed. Let's descend at about 500 feet a minute here. Can also start to reduce our thrust, but don't reduce it completely, otherwise the landing gear warning is gonna trigger, as you can hear, so gotta remain slightly above that warning level. So our airspeed is now reducing. We're looking for 250 knots, which we are going to maintain in the further descent then. Looking at the table that we drew up earlier, 20 miles prior to Bruno, we wanted to be in 9,600. We're in 9,200 now, so we are running very well on our profile. So reaching 250 knots, we can go for speed hold, and the airplane is now going to pitch down in order to maintain 250 knots. Now, again, use the ground speed to calculate how much vertical speed you need. So we have 300 knots over the ground now, times 5, 1,500 feet a minute is what we need. So instead of using speed hold, you can also just use alt hold, or sorry, vertical speed I meant, and dial in the vertical speed needed, which in our case is 1,500 feet a minute. Pretty much like that. Use thrust in order to maintain the target speed, so we want to maintain 250 over here. So again, slight increase in thrust, watch the speed indicator. If the speed is stable, you've done it right. If it changes, you got to adjust thrust slightly. So we're approaching 10 miles prior to Bruno VOR, and we wanted to be in 6,300 there. So we are running rather well on the altitude over here. Now passing 10,000, we should already have turned on the lights, like that. The seatbelt signs, and if you want to, you can select an auto brake here. So for example, I could select auto brake medium, or whatever suits your approach planning. Okay, we are now 10 miles prior Bruno, passing 6,150, so we are running 150 feet low on profile, perfectly acceptable for us for this approach. Let's go ahead and readjust the vertical speed here, looking for 1,500, which we can fly exactly, like this. So, as we can see on the chart, passing Bruno, we are going to turn track 214, and Bruno is an overfly waypoint, so after Bruno, we'll fly track 214. So what I'm going to do is I will pre-select our heading bug towards 214 over here, so that we are prepared to do the turn and only need to change to heading select mode as soon as we overfly the station. Also, since we no longer need Coxie VOR, we can pre-select our ILS frequency of 108.9 into the number 1 radio. So we have 108.9 now selected on the number 1 radio. Once we are down at an altitude, we can go ahead and read the approach checklist, or the descent and approach checklist that you can see over here. I'm going to skip over that. The exact explanation for that checklist are contained in the contained on the Flight Sim Studios website, but with the usual caveat that they are, well, technically speaking, designed for a slightly different 727. We've talked about that. So 1,000 to go has been announced. Verify that altitude select is indeed armed up there. And as we're approaching Bruno VOR, it's now 1 nautical mile prior, and we're about to overfly the VOR, change over into heading select mode, and now we're making that right-hand turn. Over here. From here on, we can continue to descend towards 2,000, but I am just going to level off over here in order to reduce the speed. On the intermediate approach, you should fly no faster than about 200 knots over here. Since we are now turning towards the ILS, we can set the front course on our RMI, which is going to be 244. Like that, and we can set the ILS frequency active down here as well. So, like that, we are now turning onto our intercept course. As soon as my speed is down towards 200, I will continue the descent to the platform altitude, which is 2,000 feet over here. So let's go ahead and do that just now. To continue the descent, select altitude select again to arm the altitude, and then we are going to dial in either the vertical speed we want or go to speed hold mode. I will use the vertical speed here today, and that's it. So now we're on intercept heading, and from here we are going to intercept the ILS approach for runway 25 right in Brussels. That is going to lead us into the landing tutorial, so let's pause the simulator over here to make things easy. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I do hope that you learned something. I'm looking forward to your feedback in the comments below, and if there is anything unclear at this point, do let me know in the comments, and I will be there to answer your questions. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope that you have enjoyed this tutorial, and I'm looking forward to see you guys again on the next one. In the meantime, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and see you all again on the next one.